Okay, so bear with me because we're going to have to go fast. Let's get started. Social stratification, it's just a division of society into groups arranged in some sort of a social hierarchy. We have these in all nations. It's just how the hierarchy is determined is different from nation to nation. Social inequality is this unequal distribution of wealth, power, or prestige among members of society. So it could be all three, it could be one of them. This is where we get social inequality from. Now, we've got plenty of systems of stratification in and across the world. Slavery is the most extreme form of social stratification. It's based on the legal ownership of people. Individuals who are slaves have no access to pursuing the resources available to society and no opportunity for social mobility, which is your ability to kind of go from one stratification level to another, right? Slavery is prohibited in every nation. However, do as they say, not as we do. We have things like child soldiers, serfdom, forced bonded laborers, human trafficking, and sex slaves. So we know that even though we say things like, it's prohibited in every nation, it's not actually prohibited because we let it happen anyway, right? Okay. The caste system is another system of stratification. This status is determined by one's family history and background, and it can't be changed. The caste system you're probably most used to is the one in India with the Brahmins and all the way down to the untouchables. India has since said that they're not doing the caste system anymore. However, we all know that some people still partake in the caste system. But, as a group, they, governmentally, they've decided to stop doing it. And then this, if we were in a classroom, this is where I would ask you, are there any other countries that you know of that have a caste system? But since I don't get to see your beautiful faces, we're just going to move on. In South of Africa, between 1948 and 1999, they experienced something called apartheid, which is the segregation of racial and ethnic groups in South Africa. This caste system, rather than being based on that social class sort of thing that you're used to in India, was based entirely on race and ethnic groups. So the groups that you had were white, Indian, colored, and black. The black people, which were 60% of the population, were forcibly removed to 80% of the country. Just think about those numbers for a second. They only had access to 20% of the land of the country that they lived in to begin with, right? And another fun little fact for you about sort of these arbitrary rules were that African Americans visiting South Africa were given honorary white status, meaning that they could move freely from white and non-white areas, which is just sort of showing you how arbitrary this was in the first place. If you want more information on this during your quarantine, and the fact that I know you're definitely not just sitting there doing schoolwork, is to watch the Trevor Noah comedy special. He talks a lot about this. I think his son Patricia is the one that he really digs into these things. So that could be some fun, entertaining information that's a little more sociological than, I don't know, Love is Blind or whatever the shit that is. Okay. So systems of stratification, we have social class. This is based on access to resources such as wealth, power, property, and prestige. This is that socioeconomic status we talk about all the time. Now, in here, this is the second time this semester you're hearing this word intersectionality, but it's this concept that identifies how different categories of inequality intersect, right? This was created by Kimberly Crenshaw, an amazing woman. And I don't care what sort of the old white men say, this is a theory, intersectionality is a theory, it is a testable, usable theory and research, and so it's essentially all of those statuses we've talked about before, how they all intersect and create different categories of inequality, right? And so for the purposes of this chapter, I want you to think about how social class starts to impact other aspects of your identity, whether it's your race or your gender or whatever, right? Just think about how your class would be impacted by all the things that we're talking about. We'll dig more into intersectionality when we get to gender and race. So, in the United States, we have this weird view that middle class is this social norm that we need to reach and get to. Sorry about the sirens. There's an assisted living home literally next door to me, and so this just happens all the time, and I apologize for it, but what are we going to do? Okay, so the middle class is this social norm that people want to identify with even if they're not a part of the class. It's this like weird status symbol. And so in survey research, we will ask them first, what is your class? And more often than not, they will say middle class. And then later, we'll ask them what their income is, and their income ranges between $25,000 and $250,000 a year, which those are not middle class. If you look on in your book for I think it's table or figure 7.1. It's a social class ladder that sort of tells you where everybody in the U.S. is technically in the social class, and yet people say they're middle class when they're not. So let's dig into these theories really quickly. Conflict theory, this is Marx. He believed there were two major social classes in capitalist societies, the capitalists and the workers, or the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, or the owners of the means of production and the workers of the means of production, those that sold their labor for wages, right? This is conflict theory. We've heard it multiple times. Now, let's move into that Weberian theory that we didn't really talk about, because this is when this theory matters, right? So Weber looked at a similar model and said, yes, we are stratified based on these categories, but really there's an additional category that you're missing. It's not just the workers and the owners of production. It's actually wealth, power, and prestige, or the way he wrote it, privilege, power, and prestige. And so it's your money and investments, how much wealth you have, your power, your ability to make change in the system. Can you change the way the system works? Think about our government, right? How much power do you have with our government? And then prestige, whether or not you're in a really good social group. Right now, if your social group includes a doctor, you're probably sitting pretty, right? For those of you that have friends or family members that work at UAB, you're probably getting information quicker than everybody else is, right? This is a prestigious social group you're in. Just, remember that. For those of you that are lost, I'm sorry. I don't know. Email me and ask me questions. I'll do what I can. So, structural functionalism, this system of stratification is functional, right? That's what we're looking for with social stratification. So certain roles might be more important for the functioning of society, and therefore we need to give them more incentive, a la money, to fill those roles. And greater rewards are necessary for work that requires more training and skills. I have been in school. I graduated last semester, and I was in school since 2005, so I don't know, maybe somebody should compensate me more. Happen, it's fine. But think of this more in terms of like a doctor, right? They are in school for a really long amount of time. Doctors get paid a lot of money. They have a very prestigious job, okay, and they get compensated for it, rightfully so. Symbolic interactionism, right? This examines the way we use status differences to categorize ourselves and others. Clothing, speech, gestures, possessions, friends, and activities all provide information about our socioeconomic status. I know all of you all have the fancy tennis shoes, and this is normally where we talk about your fancy tennis shoes. We don't get to do that. I don't know, think about it. But I am going to offer you all some extra credit. This Paul Fusel's living room scale, I'm going to post it. I will post my living room scale as well, so you can see what mine looks like, and we will share together in how prestigious or not prestigious we are based on what our living rooms look like. Okay. So yeah, that's your extra credit for this section. Now, when we look at socioeconomic status, we want to look at how socioeconomic status starts to really affect all these other things, and your life chances as a whole. So there's three things that I really try and dig into in this section: family, education, and health, right? So family, we often end up marrying people of the same socioeconomic status background as ourselves. It's a lot easier, especially when you're dealing with all the things that come into a relationship. Age at first marriage, right? It's a lot lower for people with a high school diploma versus the people with a bachelor's degree. You can see those statistics on the slide: 24 for high school, 30 years of age for bachelor's. And it's just based on things like education and women having more opportunity to and access to the world. Education itself should be the social leveler. We are a school in Birmingham. You can wander around Birmingham and see how easily and vastly different it is in Jefferson County, right? So in Jefferson County, we have more than one school district. Mountain Brook left, Homewood left, and now we have the Birmingham City Schools. Gardendale tried to leave, and they got told no. The reason all of these people left: racism. They left for racism. That is the only reason why they left. They didn't want it. It is legitimately white flight. When you drive down the Red Mountain Expressway, you can see the giant hole they put into Red Mountain so that the white people could live elsewhere, right? And so education is not a social leveler because property taxes are what fund our education. And when Mountain Brook, white flight, and created their own school district, all of their money was going into their schools and none of it was going into the city schools. And so you can see the deprivation as you drive through and look at the education, the vast differences in education just in Jefferson County. When it comes to health, think of access. Do you have access to health care? Does your socioeconomic status allow you access to health care? And then also, as your SES increases, so does your ability to exercise and make healthier foods and make some of these bigger lifestyle changes. And it's really because you're around different people who are in higher brackets than you are. So running right along. Let's talk about poverty for a bit. So the federal poverty line is an absolute measure of annual income. So we draw a line in the sand and we say, this is it. And if you are $20 over, too bad. If you're $20 under, it's great. You're already below the poverty line anyway. In 2017, a family of four was $24,600. If that's all you made, you were below the federal poverty line. If you made $24,900, $300 additional dollars a year, they didn't care, even though we know that $300 additional dollars a year is not actually going to benefit somebody already at that level, right? Most people living in poverty are not unemployed. Please get this through your head, because a lot of people like selling you on the idea that people who are receiving benefits because they're below the federal poverty line is only because they are lazy and they don't have jobs. That is not the case. They all have jobs. We have two measures of poverty. We have absolute deprivation and relative deprivation. Absolute deprivation is a subjective measure. It's your inability to meet minimum standards of food, shelter, clothing, or health. Federal agencies are the ones that determine what the federal poverty line is, and it's often the agencies around food, and so it's not really including the shelter and the clothing and the health care. So, take that as you will. Relative deprivation, this is this relational measure based on standards of living, and the best example I have here is a nurse versus a doctor. Nurses do not get paid the same amount of money as a doctor, but they're spending all their time around doctors. So a lot of times they'll say things like, oh, I'm poor and I don't have that much money. Well, it's because they're around a lot of doctors. Their social network is full of people who have a lot more money than they do. But relative to the rest of the population, nurses make a really nice living, right? And so it's that relative, who are you comparing yourself to? Are you wealthy? Are you not wealthy? Are you poor? Are you not poor? Who are you comparing yourself to, right? And that's the difference between objective and relative. Okay, so this is just figure 7.5 in your book, and it shows you the breakdown of race, age, and gender in terms of poverty, and you can see some pretty obvious things really quickly, like blacks and Hispanics have higher poverty rates, and the younger versus the older in terms of the percent of poverty, and then, of course, men versus women. You can look into that yourself. Now, when it comes to federal spending, right, a lot of times we say things like we don't want to give to the federal poverty line. We want to give to things like welfare and Medicaid and blah, 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 blah. But if you look at this wonderful thing, Social Security and the military are where a lot of our spending is. And there's a different graph that I would show you in a different place where we actually do a lot of spending when it comes to fraud, waste, and abuse. And that's coming from structural places, not individuals. And so we really don't spend that much money on these things, these assistance programs for living in poverty. All right, and finally, let's talk about the invisibility of poverty. Residential segregation, political disenfranchisement, digital divide, and homelessness, right? So if you're residentially segregated, where is our institution located? Where is Birmingham Southern College at? Look around. How is everyone else racially segregated from you? Political disenfranchisement, right? So if you are impoverished and you do not have an ID because you've never been able to go get one, can you vote in the state of Alabama? The answer is no. It's no, right? The digital divide, do you have access to the internet? If you don't have access to the internet, how are you supposed to apply for a job? Jobs require you to apply online, right? And fill out online forms. And so this is why we should never get rid of libraries, because libraries are the place for people to be able to go and use a computer and internet access for free, right? Please don't ever get rid of libraries. And then finally we have homelessness. Homelessness, we treat them in a different place. We try and make them as invisible as possible. People do not want to look at the homeless individuals. They tell you, like when you go to New York City, don't make eye contact with the homeless, and then you come down here and they say the same thing, right? So all of this is to make poverty invisible so that we don't notice these people, we don't see these people, and then we can pretend that this stuff isn't actually happening when in fact it is, right? So, 15 minutes as quickly as I could go. Hopefully y'all got something out of it. Email me with questions. I'll talk to y'all soon.